And I remember landing from that jump and immediately calling my sister and saying, Carrie, I don't know what just happened, but I'm not the same. Something has changed. And I just like beaming, but also bewildered. And there was this experience of just the infinite. It wasn't even bliss. It was just boundlessness. And I'd never meditated before. I'd never heard of any of the possible descriptions that people have of various meditative states or levels of connection or presence with the universe. I didn't have any languaging around it, any framework or any tradition of hanging it on. It was something that I gained by putting myself in a situation where my identity, myself, couldn't compute what was going on.
Brett Kistler is an entrepreneur, facilitator, coach, and co-host of the Art of Accomplishment podcast. Brett spent 15 years traveling the world as a full-time extreme sports athlete, completing thousands of jumps, base jumping, and wingsuiting. In this conversation, we discuss how to cultivate a healthy relationship with fear that empowers you to move through life with greater presence and awareness.
A lot of it comes down to investigating what it is that you're actually afraid of. You know, like how much of my journey was to go out into this lifestyle because I was afraid of wasting my life, or I was afraid of living some form of lifestyle that I would have judged as sedentary or boring or normie, or like there was a lot of that going on. And also I was scared of not being good enough, not feeling good enough, not meeting my potential.
Brett shares how suppressed fear often manifests itself in subconscious patterns that can control our lives.
Another piece that's relevant to this journey is recognizing the way that each of us have developed a pattern of the way that we manage our fear, the way that we hold it at arm's length. There are people who, when they're scared, they will get angry, and they'll just get angry at whatever. Really recognizing not only the things that we're afraid of that we're not recognizing that we're afraid of, but also recognizing the pattern, the patterns of physical tension, the patterns of the way that we filter our consciousness to not be overwhelmed or to feel like we're still in control when in reality we're not.
Brett shares how when we welcome fear and all emotions fully, we empower ourselves to make more informed decisions that can guide us to better outcomes.
The thing that allows me to be the most present in making any decision in life is to allow more and more of my fears, my motivations, my desires, my wants, and a felt sense connection to what I care about to really be there with me in those moments, informing, like a crowd of elders and advisors, all having something to say. Me not having to listen or change my tune based on what any of them says, but really just feel the energy of that whole crowd within me and let that guide what I'm doing.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Brett, what's up, man?
Scott, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
And it's not lost on me as we enter this conversation that I'm talking about a jumping off point with a base jumping athlete. You got into all of these adventure sports as a way of self-exploration. And I'm curious, like, what were the things that you were learning as you stood at the edge of a plane or a cliff? Like, what was the feeling and drive there that kind of got you hooked?
Yeah. Whew. Initially, it was really about, for me, it was about conquering fear. I would have probably called it conquering at the time. Later on, I'd call it welcoming. But it really was about wrestling with my, ultimately what I'm capable of, but also by way of exploring what I'm afraid of and really being with it. So some of my early jumps, especially when I got into base jumping, some of my early base jumps, I remember just being absolutely sick to my stomach the entire time until the jump was over. Like climbing up some old smokestack somewhere on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania, and It's in the middle of the night, and I've only made like 2 base jumps before, and this is my third. And I'm standing up there, and the wind is kind of blowing towards the Ohio River, which I'll freeze to death if I land in. And the people that I'm with are far more experienced base jumpers, and I'm like the brand newbie who didn't even bring the right equipment with me and had to borrow a pilot chute that was the right size. And I'm just standing there, and I'm just like, the wind is kind of cold. There's this red light going off next to me. It's dark. I can't see the landing area. There's just a glow stick in it. And I'm just like, this is not a daytime skydive kind of big landing area situation. I'm just like, what am I doing here? And yet there's something drawing me towards it. And I'm just, okay, here I am. And I'm finding myself climbing out over the railing and standing awkwardly on the outside of the railing, holding it with my hands. And I'm trying to check with all of my friends, like, is everything actually okay? But I know that they can't tell me everything's okay. They can tell me that they've checked my gear and that my pins are fine and that somebody's holding my pilot chute and they're ready to go, but nobody can tell me that I'm ready for this. And really sitting with that, I was really drawn to sitting with that question of, what am I capable of and what am I ready for? And so I found myself naturally in more and more situations where I was just like, I have no idea how I'm going to get into or out of whatever situation this is. Finding myself hanging on the side of a cliff, trying to climb out of a jump somewhere in like the Western US, and freezing to the side of a wall, holding it for 20 minutes and being like, the next move is really scary. I'm not roped. I'm like covered in ice, and my next move could be my last, but it's the only way through. I can't say exactly what it is that made that particular experience exciting enough to cross the high threshold required to actually go do it, rather than just be like, that might be an interesting alternate life path if I took it. But actually to take that path, I don't actually understand what was fully going on there. But the biggest theory that I have is that there was already a lot of fear in me that I wasn't aware of. And any opportunity that I had to create the conditions where feeling fear was permissioned, where it made sense for me to be scared. So I got to really wrestle with and feel that fear, rather than sitting in class and procrastinating my homework and shaming myself about it and feeling separate and feeling inferior and wondering what the fuck is wrong with me, which was a lot of my early life, was not recognizing how scared I was all the time. Having the identity of, I'm a relatively brave person who's got things together. Some part of me needed to really let myself have that fear. And the best way for me to do that was to go to a place, go do something where fear was unassailably natural to have in that moment.
And when did the relationship to fear, when and how did that evolve from something to conquer to something to welcome?
Yeah. So I'll describe the experience of my very first base jump, which foreshadows much of the journey in ways that I wasn't able to understand at that time. My first jump was at Bridge Day, which is an event. It actually just happened this weekend. It's at the third weekend in October every year. Happens at the New River Gorge Bridge, which is an 876-foot bridge over the New River in West Virginia. And for like 6 hours, one day a year, the National Park Service gives a permit for us to have this event. And something like 400 base jumpers and 250,000 spectators show up. And they build platforms, and there's like a Olympic diving board that you can run and bounce off of. I think they've even had like trebuchets to throw people off the bridge, all kinds of really fun kind of gambits. It's a tall bridge, so you have enough time to free fall for like 5 to like max 7 seconds before you deploy your parachute, which gives you time to recover from making a kind of weird exit. So people can do some experimentation. But that was where I made my first jump. And I remember standing at the edge, and everything just felt bigger. The whole world felt bigger. And the moment that I jumped, there was something that occurred. It felt like my consciousness switched off and on again. Like there was a blue screen of death, kind of like system crash. And when it came back on, I was already in free fall. And I was experiencing the world in a way I'd never experienced it before. There was no thought in my head. There was no identity or self. I felt as though I was the environment around me. And I was just, I intuitively just gave it a 5 second delay, which is 5 second delay, meaning that's how long it took before I deployed my parachute. I was intending to take 5 seconds. I took 5 seconds. I didn't count 5 seconds. I just, my body just did it. And
sounds very Wu Wei.
yeah, yeah.
Just the effortless action, just taking care of itself.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And that was possibly one of my first, one could say that you spend your entire babyhood in presence, in some sort of presence. But this was as an adult, as a 19-year-old, one of the first or deepest experiences of real presence, unmediated by my thoughts and my like subject object relations to reality that I ever had. And I remember landing from that jump and immediately calling my sister and saying, Carrie, I don't know what just happened, but I'm not the same. Something has changed. And I just like beaming, but also bewildered. I'm just like, something has changed. I'm not the same. I don't know what it is, but something happened. And there was this experience of just the infinite. It wasn't even bliss. It was just boundlessness. And I'd never meditated before. I'd never heard of any of the possible descriptions that people have of various meditative states or levels of connection or presence with the universe. I didn't have any languaging around it, any framework or any tradition of hang it on. It wasn't even something that I'd gained through direct practice. It was something that I gained by putting myself in a situation where my identity, myself, couldn't compute what was going on. So all that was left to compute was just the flow, was just my body responding. So I started chasing that dragon without quite knowing what I was chasing. So over the years, I just kept finding myself in the position where, like, getting into situations where it was required for me to be that present. And so for a long time, people would ask me, like, why is it that you jump? You're such an adrenaline junkie. Is it about the risk? Is it about the being a rebel? I'm like, yeah, it's all those things. But actually what it's really about is that when I'm flying a wingsuit down a mountain, I'm not thinking about my taxes or my laundry. I'm not thinking about myself and whether I'm good enough. I'm not trying to please anybody. What I am doing is just being a body in the universe, fully exposed and deeply with it, in a way where I trust myself to be with it and take care of myself on such an embodied level that I don't need to think about it in that moment. And so it took me some time to recognize this, but I started to respond to those questions like it's actually all about being present. And it's sort of wild to me that it took maybe 10, 15 years of that before I started thinking about meditating or like thinking about doing that direct practice on the ground. I kept chasing it in these very specific contexts because it was about the context creating this situation for me, the context bringing out my connection with myself in the presence. And it took a long time for me to recognize that I could practice that directly.
You know, it's so epic that you were able to access that at such an early point in your journey. And then also amazing that you put that together, that's actually something that is, accessible without jumping off of a smokestack or an Arctic freeze. Talk to me about when that journey deepened,
Mm.
when you were like, wait a second, okay, this isn't just about, I don't need to jump off mountains to do this. And it's actually this state of experience that is something that I'm drawn towards.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that from sort of the relational perspective first. So I mentioned earlier how one of the things that I really enjoyed about jumping was the camaraderie, how being at an exit point, going through these experiences with others really helped us drop our masks and be vulnerable with each other and connect with each other. And of course, have these big emotional experiences together that'd be really bonding. And so it was really about this brotherhood and sisterhood, that there was a sense of belonging. There was a sense of togetherness that I didn't have in a lot of areas of my life. I had it in some, but there was something special about this one. And so over the years, maybe fast forwarding from when I made my first base jump in 2005 to 10 years later, around 2015, 2016, I'm at the top of the sport. I'm, invited to a lot of the big events. I'm jumping in Europe all summer long. I'm basically living in Switzerland for the summers and making like 7 jumps a day some days, and really just living it. However, the way that the sport of wingsuiting progressed, it kind of blew up really quickly, and the equipment became really, really advanced much faster than the skills of newer jumpers could become advanced. And a number of other factors, YouTube, followers, audience capture, all
Yeah.
these things started to really work their way into what had been really a very personal thing, started to become kind of infused with all these other characteristics uh, of image, identity, of trying to make friends with the people who can invite you to the best new events, trying to get sponsorships, creating all of this to create new opportunities to go really deeper into the love of the sport, mostly. Also somewhat to accrue status points and all the other fun human things. But what this eventually led to is a rapid increase in the fatality. I don't know if it was the fatality rate, but just the number of fatalities, because more people were getting into the sport and more of them were new. And there were less old school mentors to new school, green
There was less
jumpers.
elders.
Less elders, yeah. And, of course, people who come into base jumping are often a little bit rebellious and anti, authority. So it can be hard for even those elders to really have as much influence in the community as with at least a lot of people as you might hope. So all that to say, fatality rate started to soar. And around 2015, 2016, each summer I lost about 14 to 16 friends, or like ranging from friends to people that I knew to people that I kind of jumped with a few times to acquaintances. Remember there was one incident where 3 people died in one incident in the summer of, I believe, 2016. And they were people who were at the top of the sport. And 2 of them were following one of them to video them. And all 3 of them could have made different decisions, but because they were videoing and they were kind of zoned in on paying attention to following that one person, they all made a judgment call that went off course, and they were like 10 meters short of clearing a ledge, and all of them went in. And then a week later, somebody else who was relatively close to me died. And so I reflected on 2016. At the end of the year, I looked and I was like, I have like 92 boarding passes from flights this year. I've flown 92 times around the world. And I realized that in that year, I had transitioned from traveling primarily to base jump to go do things, to go to places I could jump, to traveling to see my people, to be with my friends, often to go to memorials, also often to go to an event where I knew my friends would be at because I wanted to be with them. And I realized this entire thing had become social for me. It had become about my tribe, about my community, about human connection. And so that's a realization that I had before I really even recognized presence is a thing that I'm all about, and I want to practice that in my life. It was really the relationships and how we be here with each other is almost everything. And when it comes down to being on an exit point where everybody's got some egos, everybody's got some motivations, people are afraid to be the one who speaks up about the wind not being comfortable for them, or they're the one who doesn't want to hike down and make everybody wait 4 hours while they climb down when everyone jumped and landed at the car immediately. And, we want to be jumping with the best people so that they can give us their wisdom, and we can like get skill from them through osmosis and learn from them and get invited to better events. All these things going on, get better sponsors. All these things were happening, and they were taking us away from each other. Ultimately, that I think is the biggest factor that was playing into all the fatalities and continues to this day, though I'm not as active in the sport. And so around that time, that's when I started to really reflect on, initially I wanted to reflect on what is actually killing my friends, and how do I prevent it from happening to me. And so I was really looking into this. I'm like, is it the technique? It's not the technique. Is it the gear? It's not the gear. We have great gear. It just keeps getting better and better. We know how to use it. We know how to assess sites. There are books now being written about this. It's no longer being passed down from person to person in some like oral tradition like it was in the 80s, 90s. And the major factor that I found is in almost every fatality, on some level, somebody who is lying to themselves, somebody who is not clearly seeing themselves, making a decision that they knew on some level, or at least somebody around them knew, but wasn't able to communicate in a way that they were able to hear it. Like the consolidation and the flow of wisdom in our community was not happening as deeply as it could. And that's all happening on the human layer. That's all happening on the level of human connection. So I personally, I made a decision. I was like, okay, we're losing friends. It's not just new people. It's not just the young and dumb. It's also the intermediates, the upper intermediates. Some of the most advanced jumpers are dying from what might seem like flukes, but are also judgment calls, depending on which way you look at it. And so I wrote down a short list of a couple of names of friends. I was like, these are the people that I feel like are my true peers, where they and I would make similar decisions. They and I would approach a jump in a similar way. They and I would tend to agree on a site assessment. And so if any of the people on this short list, there's like three or four names that I put on that list. If any of these people die jumping, then it's obvious to me that all the stories I tell myself about how I'm different and I'm not going to die because I don't make the decisions all those other people make that do die, I will know that there's something wrong with, like, there's something missing in my model. So not long after I made that list, one of them died. I was in Uganda at the time, driving like 14 hours out into the middle of somewhere in eastern Uganda to go bushwhack through some mountains and try to find some wingsuit base jump on some crumbly edge of a hill with a friend of mine. And, we're like 7 hours into this 14-hour drive out into the boondocks, and I get a message on my satellite phone, or my InReach, from my partner at the time. And she said, JVH went in. And JVH, John Van Horn, a friend of mine, who was one of the names that I put on that list. And in that moment, everything just crumbled. Whatever idea that I had that I was somehow special or different was just gone. And so I was on this base jumping trip with my friend, who was also pretty torn up over this death. We didn't know how it happened. We only got a single satellite message. We're out in the middle of, there's no internet out there. And we're going through the motions of exploring. We're like bushwhacking up mountains. We're hiring locals to guide us, and we're staying at people's houses. And I just would find myself walking down the street in some remote Ugandan village, and all of a sudden I would just burst into tears crying. And I'd walk down the street, this 6'7" white guy, surrounded by, like, the way that happens in Africa, you'll get like swarms of children just see you, and they'll run up and they'll be like Mzungu, or whatever the local word for white is, and they'll just swarm you, and they're so excited to see you. And meanwhile, I'm just standing there, and I'm just like bursting into tears and just like wailing, walking down the street. And I'm just like, this has got to be the weirdest thing for these people. Like, they must not have any clue what's going on. Maybe they actually had a deeper clue than I knew. Yeah, that process ultimately led to me stepping back from the sport. I went back to, after that trip, I went to Switzerland, and I climbed up to Jungfrau, which was one of my favorite jumps that I'd made dozens of times. And I hiked up that hike with a very good friend of mine. And I was like, I don't know if this is or isn't my last jump, but I'm going to go up and I'm going to feel it out. And as I hiked up that hike, I stopped at the same stump or the same rock or bathed in the same waterfall as people that I had hiked that hike with before. And essentially, like, encountered the ghosts. Not like, I don't mean that in like a literal way, but the memories flooded to me of no less than 7 people who I'd been on that hike with who were now dead. And I was just no longer having it. I was like, all of these people had families who knew them far better than I did. And like, who am I to say that, like, oh man, the time that we had in those mountains was so worth it, though, to the families. Like, I was going through some like shame loops around it. Some like, who are we? Who am I to be doing this? Really second guessing. And I got to the top of that jump, and I geared up and I prepared. And I was like, okay, it's all clear. Weather's fine. I'm ready to jump. So I jumped, and then I flew, did a normal, comfortable flight, deployed my parachute, landed, and I was like, yeah. And my friend landed, and she was like, wow, yeah, that was so good. You want to go for another one? And I was like, I think I'd actually rather go pull out my laptop, go to the Airtime Cafe, and like get some work done. That just sounds more enjoyable to me. And so there was a recognition that my enjoyment in the sport had kind of faded. And I now recognize that it faded because there was just a lot of unprocessed emotions, that by having this backlog of unprocessed emotions, the joy of jumping wasn't available to me. So I took a step back, and I decided I wasn't going to jump again until I felt like I had gotten a handle on the pilot error, the human element of the sport, such that I would write a list of names and be correct about who actually would be surviving long term and who wouldn't, and have myself be on that list.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness: The Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below, and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story, man. It's very, it's intense. That's an incredibly intense experience. And I know there's probably lots of things that have happened along the way, but I know the way that you guys talk about fear now at the Art of Accomplishment is, I think, quite different than our convention of dealing with it, which is like, get away, I don't want to be around it. Or,
Mm,
okay, I'm going to conquer this and I'm going to be fearless and I'm a fearless person and I'm going to walk up to people, girls that I think are pretty and I don't know, or I'm going to jump off a thing, or I'm going to do the thing. Right. And, you've gained a lot of wisdom now in terms of how to relate to fear. And I'd love to just switch gears and talk about,
yeah.
what you've learned and how others can, start to maybe examine this inside of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes down to investigating what it is that you're actually afraid of. Like how much of my journey was to go out into this lifestyle because I was afraid of wasting my life, or I was afraid of living some form of lifestyle that I would have judged as sedentary or boring or normie, or like there was a lot of that going on. Um, and also I was scared of not being good enough, not feeling good enough, not meeting my potential. I grew up as somebody who everybody in school would tell me, you have so much potential, but you're throwing it away because you're not doing your work. And so I took on those stories. I have a lot of potential. Therefore, I have this high standard of what I will do and who I will be. And so I was so afraid of not reaching so far out to the edge of experience that I found myself in a category of my own, being special, that sometimes that fear would override other important fears, like a very real fear of not being ready for a particular jump and making that jump and then crashing into some rocks in the landing area and nearly breaking myself. And the jump from the smokestack, I flared my parachute and stalled it and crashed into what happened to be a mulch pile on my back. And if it had happened to not be a mulch pile but was just hard ground, I probably would have broken my back right there, and that would have been possibly my career in 3 jumps. But I lucked out and I wasn't ready for that jump. And so the signals were there. So a lot of my journey with fear has been recognizing what the different nuances of fear. Often we'll focus on the one thing that we think we're afraid of, when in reality there's a plethora of different fears that are all playing into the present moment and desires. And so ultimately, as I was saying, when I stepped away from the sport, it became a journey of exploring fears that I hadn't recognized that I had. When I was having the identity of the person who confronts my fear, it was hard to see through that identity to recognize how many ways that I wasn't actually facing or being with or exploring or investigating many different fears, largely on a social level. There's a way that there's a way that an entire life path can simply become a way to become someone who's lovable and acceptable. And that can be a beautiful life path that takes you in amazing directions. I don't know who said this first, but I love the phrase that neurosis drives culture. And so like all the ways that I was avoiding feelings ended up creating a beautiful life for myself that was perfectly designed to ultimately deeply confront those feelings in not an abstract way, but in a deeply lived way. And that I'm deeply grateful for.
I know you work with people now on this and even have a welcoming fear, like immersive, crazy experience where you guys jump off some things and work on the emotions. Like, what are the steps when someone really wants to start to understand and become aware of like the fears, either covert or underlying, like lots of these behaviors and activities and things that show up in our lives?
Yeah. So the retreat is a good example. People show up and we're camping out in the desert. We're camping out near tall cliffs that I've done a lot of base jumps from. They're base jumpable cliffs. They are big ones. You can climb right out to the edge of one and lie flat on your stomach and just look straight down this 500-foot face to another 500 foot of talus into this giant canyon. And people show up there, and you'd imagine that, of course, you're going to be able to feel fear on the edge of a cliff, especially if you're clipped into a rope and you're planning on jumping off. And interestingly, sort of how it was for me, how I described that when I got myself in a position where it was my social nervous system gave me permission to feel fear and express it, all the fear like that I hadn't been feeling was able to be present. Some of it was about the jumping, some of it is about the cliff, but some of it is actually like breadcrumbs to some deeper fears. So what I have people do there is we come out to the edge of the cliff and we do exercises that bring people into the awareness of fear in the rest of their lives. Like if you were to look over this cliff, you were to fall over this cliff right now, what's the first thing that you imagine? And people are like, well, I'd lose my family. My kids would grow up without a parent. My book would never get written. And so it brings you into contact with all these things that are subconscious fears that you might not on a day-to-day basis while you're going about your life really be thinking about, but they're there. And then the next thing that we do, not just like sequentially, this isn't the sequence of the retreat, but another piece that's relevant to this journey is recognizing the way that each of us have developed a pattern of the way that we manage our fear, the way that we hold it at arm's length, the way that so there are people who, like I said before, when you're standing at an exit point and you're ready to jump, there are people who, when they're scared, they will get angry. And they'll just get angry at whatever. They'll get angry at the chest strap for being what, and it just becomes obvious. In this situation, it becomes so obvious that whatever pattern you're running is, on some level neurotic, on some level has been what you needed to do to take care of yourself in the past. But the pattern comes into stark relief, and you get to see in a group the different ways that people have coped with their fear. There's the people who will kind of just dissociate and then walk off the edge of the cliff when previously they looked like they were going to be so scared and not do it at all. And then they're just like, whoop, oh, looks like you suddenly had this switch that you found that went this other direction. Mm. And how often does that show up in your life? How often does that show up when you're having a difficult conversation with your partner, or when you are when you're asking for a raise, or when you're about to fire an employee? How does that show up? So really recognizing not only the things that we're afraid of that we're not recognizing that we're afraid of, the fears that are really driving our lives, even while we might have the story or the identity of being somebody who's facing our fears, or facing maybe particular select fears that we feel comfortable facing, but totally turning away from other ones. But also recognizing the pattern, the patterns of physical tension, the patterns of the way that we filter our consciousness to not be overwhelmed, or to feel like we're still in control when in reality we're not.
When you work with people to turn towards some of these things, which I think is like culturally not the instinct that we've been conditioned to approach these things. Like, I think a lot of people who haven't done this work are kind of curious, like what that unlocks for them. Is it the fears go away? Is it they become more manageable? Is it I have more agency now? Like, what have you seen in helping people with this?
It's that it just comes more into awareness. So it gets factored in ways that it otherwise wouldn't. Back in jumping, over the years, I started to recognize, I was paying a lot of attention to people who had survived a long time in the sport and what was different about them, what had changed in them. And one of the things that I noticed almost universally was that the people who had the longest track records with the best safety record with fewest accidents were the ones who, if I was at an exit point with them and I was with like a bunch of young bucks who are all trying to prove something, they would be the first person to be like, wow, I'm scared. Holy shit, I'm scared shitless. I've got the fear poops. I gotta go take a fear dump right now. And they're just with it. And there's a thing that people might describe as not giving a fuck, but it's actually, I would say it's more of a like not giving a fuck of what people think, or that kind of thing. But I think it's actually more of actually recognizing all the things you give a fuck about and letting them be there with you. So the fact that I don't want my girlfriend at the time to get the phone call that I've had to make, that can be with me at the exit point. If I'm focused on that fear and I'm resisting it and I'm losing access to other fears, then that can be disorienting. But if that's just with me, that factors into my decision to make a jump. And if I push that away and I'm like, I can't think about the negative consequences in life because I just need to focus on this one jump. That's a strategy you can have. And it can be helpful as a set of training wheels, in my opinion. But ultimately, the thing that allows me to be the most present in making any decision in life is to allow more and more of my fears, my motivations, my desires, my wants, and a felt sense connection to what I care about to really be there with me in those moments, informing, like a crowd of elders and advisors, all having something to say. Me not having to listen or change my tune based on what any of them says, but really just feel the energy of that whole crowd within me and let that guide what I'm doing.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the world of parts work, right? Where the language they use for these different, inner components is I have a part that feels like this and I have a part that feels like that. And, and that's kind of the interface for this stuff that exists subconsciously. Where does love come into this picture? Because I also know this is something else that you guys talk a lot about at Art of Accomplishment.
Yeah. The piece that I was just speaking about, like where everything that I care about is present. The fears are pointers to what we care about. And where what we care about, there's love. So anywhere there's fear, there's actually love. So I get that for a second. We are often socialized to think that fear is the thing that gets in the way of love or is on an opposite spectrum of love. And there's ways of seeing that's true. However, there's another way of seeing it where every experience of fear, even the most subtle ones that show up in me, are direct breadcrumbs back to something that I care about and my love for myself, my love for the family that I don't want to have go to a funeral for me dying base jumping, my love for my journey of self exploration that if the deepest juice that I can get from that is from base jumping, then like, how do you then sit with both of those things? I love this and I love that. It's a different experience than I'm afraid of this and I'm afraid of that. When you see through the fear to the love. And ultimately, this is where I started talking about how the thing that became the most important thing to me about jumping was the people. It really was like, what am I doing all this self-exploration for? If not to open up deeper engagement with the world, with myself, and finding that what naturally unfolds from my deeper engagement with myself is deeper engagement with other people, deeper love, allowing a deeper love. They're a really difficult, I'd say a really challenging aspect of the journey with base jumping and loving others came from, when I started jumping, people told me this is just how base jumping goes. You're going to fall in love with your friends. You're going to meet some of the most amazing, interesting, you're going to develop some of the deepest connections you've ever had in your life. And it's all going to be well and good for a little while. And then one by one, they're going to start to die on you. And some part of me was like, okay, great. Sign me up. That sounds like an adventure. I'll try to survive. And like, I've watched enough war movies to have a sense of what it's like when people band together and like connect over a challenging experience that not all of them make it through. And I was like, okay, cool, let's do this. And of course, when it actually started to happen, I was just like, well, fuck that thought. The thought that some part of me actually wanted to get into this and be like, great, let's like make good friends and then they'll die and it'll be like a character building experience. I was just like, fuck myself for ever having that thought. It took me some time to come back around and recognize that there actually was like all of that was still love. And I am grateful for that journey. And there was something a little bit egoic in it of like, I want to build up this, like, I need to go through difficult experiences. I need to put myself through suffering to become a valuable person. There was some kind of story going on there that has since fallen away.
I'm quite familiar with that one. Life has to be hard. Startups.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think like this, there's something about what you're describing that I also wanted to talk to you about. So, on this theme of like welcoming all parts of yourself, I think there is this thing for people that go on the self-discovery path or the spiritual path where there's these concepts around like, well, this is good and this is bad. And one of those things that I've seen in that socialization is like, well, competitiveness. If you're competitive, then you're separate. Like you're separating yourself from others when you're trying to be special and it's egoic and like you're greedy and like all these things that come up. And I know that that's an example of something in your life that you've, had an interesting experience with welcoming. And I'd love to go into that and learn more.
Yeah. And this goes deep into what we were just talking about as well, with the things that are in the way of us connecting and seeing and being with each other, where there were a number of experiences that I had where, I was on some track of ambition. Like I started to get the sponsor and I was like, oh great, I've got the sponsor now. And maybe this could grow and maybe I can like make a living by being sponsored to do this thing and travel the world and make these and get like access to helicopters to go jump stuff that I'd never be able to afford to do myself. And like, this is it, the golden ticket. And also very inexperienced in actually navigating that world. So there were times that I brought in a friend and then also was like, but don't take the spotlight from me. But I wasn't really saying that. So I'd get just this like kind of passive aggressive kind of competitive undermining game with them, which would result in that happening back to me. And there were a lot of things that kind of occurred subtly there. Like I wouldn't let myself imagine that I wouldn't let myself consciously recognize that I had like a frenemy situation going on when I'm in this lifestyle where like any of us could die at any moment. There's no time for that shit, is one of the moral things that I might have thought in my head of like, I shouldn't have these thoughts. So I wasn't letting myself see my competitiveness. I wasn't really owning it. And it was leaking out in all these weird ways. And there was this time when I met up with a couple of friends and we went up to the top of this jump in Switzerland and we were gearing up for the jump and they pulled out these wingsuits that had the logos of my sponsor on them. And I was like, oh, how'd this happen? And they were like, yeah, so-and-so connected us with what's it not or whatever. And I was like, oh, I thought that was my sponsor. I apparently didn't even know that this was happening. So apparently I'm like so out of the loop. And so I was like feeling hurt, but not really letting myself feel the hurt. So skipping over the hurt, I was like, oh, you know what I can do? I can extend an invitation to them to go to go wingsuit at an event in Turkey that I've been invited to that I'm not gonna be able to make it to. So I'll do this fig leaf thing, and then I'll be able to like build some social capital that way. I'll be like a good sport about it. but I wasn't letting myself feel the hurt. I wasn't letting myself really feel or recognize that there was this competitiveness going on in me. And so we completed that jump. We hop on the bus and we're driving back to town. And so I was telling them about this jump in Turkey, or this event. And while I was inviting them and I was like connecting them with the people who would give them the formal invite and they would go, there was a part of me that was like, and this is like scary to say publicly still, but there was a part of me who thought, well, you know what? It's kind of dangerous out there. And if something were to happen to them, maybe they'd get out of my way. Had that thought crossed my mind. I pushed it away. And instead what I did was like, okay, yeah, so there's this like crazy chairlift kind of thing where you're getting lowered over this cable, and it's really funky because the moment you jump off of the lift, the cable, like the tension on the line pulls the chair sideways and throws you into this weird off-axis thing that no matter what you thought you were going to do, if you thought you were going to do an on-axis front flip, you're going to have a twist in it. And I was trying to be in the persona of the base jumper who thinks everything that's kind of scary is also kind of cool. And I was telling them essentially what this like very dangerous aspect of the jump was, but I was telling them in this sort of playful way. And then there was another jump that they were going to be invited to do at that event. That was a wingsuit jump that I was like dead serious with them. I was like, watch out for that jump. I've never seen where they're setting that ramp up. They are not wingsuit base jumpers who are setting it up. It might not even be a real jumpable thing. Do not just trust whatever they say. Like fully assess that site. So I was very serious about warning them about the wingsuit site. And I was playful about warning them about the chair. And about a month later, I get a phone call. The two of them had jumped from that chair. One of them had thrown some flips. His flips were kind of off axis because presumably the way that the mechanism of the chair works, as I was describing. And he tried to deploy his parachute and his pilot chute wrapped around his leg. And he just burned right in front of the entire town. And when I heard that news, I wasn't aware of what happened until years later, doing the art of accomplishment work, doing like grief processes around this. It took years for me to recognize that in that moment, the part of me that had the thought, well, maybe they'll die and get out of my way, like suffered what I've heard some people call this moral injury. It's like when like a soldier in combat kills somebody, but they kind of enjoyed it because of the feelings of the moment. And then later on they reflect and they're just like, I can't, like, there's a monster in me who enjoyed that. There's something like that occurred for me there, where in the way that I wasn't aware of my competitiveness, in the way that I didn't let that surface and fully own it, I pushed it away as being bad or wrong. And then when something happened that I could link back as consequences of it, regardless of how true that is, this person made their own assessment of the site. I did give them that information as playfully as I did. They absolutely were responsible for making their own decisions. So there's no way that I directly caused that accident, but there's a way that I could consider myself having played a part in it. And so for me to later on through processing, grapple with the fact that my competitiveness caused me to be anything other than direct and sincere and maximally loving and caring for the people that I cared about, because I wasn't aware of my fear of not being good enough really driving the show, of my fear of my FOMO, of my not getting opportunities, of my, of facing my insecurities, because that wasn't in my direct awareness. I went on this long ass journey that eventually brought me into contact with it so I can talk about it today. And now, that's why that's why doing this work directly is so important to me. I look back on my life and I imagine how many of my friends would still be alive if we as a community had the deep practice and explicit practice and tools of really showing up for one another and being willing to feel the heartbreak of saying what I think needs to be said and somebody still being capable of making their own decisions, or to fully allow myself to love somebody even if I think they might be dying soon because of the decisions they're making, rather than hold back to try to stay safe. There was a period of time where I would be hesitant to get close to jumpers that I considered, to get emotionally close to jumpers that I considered at risk. And then maybe they would die, and I'd regret not having gotten closer to them while they were around. And maybe in that closeness communicating something that would be helpful for them. But even if it wasn't about me being able to save them, if it was just about me having the experience of connecting with them on that deeper level while I had the chance, I still want that. I might not want to jump with them in such a way where if I know I'm likely to get caught into a particular kind of groupthink in that group. So I might have my boundaries, but over time I started to recognize that anything that's in the way of me loving my friends fully is something that I want to investigate, even if I'm afraid of losing them. I know I will lose them. Some of them, statistically. I don't know which ones. I don't know when. They might lose me. But I'm not here on this earth to not feel the full love and the heartbreak of that.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. It brings me to one of the core practices that I've had on this journey, which is, the best way to discover, at least for me, how to keep the heart open is to notice when it's closed. And then to use each one of those moments to see what is it, what is the pattern or the imprint or the concept in the consciousness that is driving that.
Yeah.
And it's fucking the coolest, most fascinating thing that is constantly shown to you, throughout just living everyday life. And it's one of the things that I love about Art of Accomplishment and what you and Joe and everyone in that community is creating is really like grounding these opportunities for self-discovery in everyday life.
Yeah.
Where it's like the spiritual path isn't just going to a 10-day retreat and then dropping back into your life. Like, it's like, no, like all these opportunities, whether it's base jumping or business or relating to your partner, like this is the way to get that awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. Consciousness is very context dependent. Like the story that I described of my first jump, I'm so grateful and lucky that I actually stumbled into an experience. I could say I stumbled into it. I could also say some deeper wisdom drove me towards it. But I found an experience an experience of deep connection with myself and the world. And I found a context in which, the constraints of the moment, the adrenaline, the high stakes essentially called me into presence. And it felt for a while like it was about that context. Like that context is what I needed. And I'm grateful to have had that experience so that over time I could start to recognize that it's available to me in any moment. It's available to me in this conversation right now. It's available to me when I'm receiving a phone call about a dead friend that I feel guilt about. That's available then, whether to whatever extent I'm capable of allowing it, it's available.
What is
And
your, I was going to ask, like, what is your experience like today? Like, how do you work with this wisdom that you've obtained, going through deepening all these years?
yeah, I don't even know that I'd call it an attainment more so than a practice. It's that I'm more and more developing the practice of allowing into my awareness in a moment what I might be afraid to see, and
Mm.
also what I might be afraid to feel, which can be pleasure. Joe and I just recently released an episode on pleasure, and it's about finding the pleasure in doing the dishes. I had the other day there was something that I was really excited about um the following day, and I noticed myself being graspy and clingy towards this future thing that I was anticipating. It's like trying to force it to happen now.
Mm.
And I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like driving myself kind of crazy about it. And I was like, oh, I'm actually scared of feeling my excitement fully right now. To fully
Mm.
feel my present excitement for the thing that's happening in the future, like because I'm scared of feeling that joy, I'm instead pushing it to the future and then trying to grasp it from the future and bring it to me, which just tenses me up and makes me actually kind of miserable right now. And I recognize that and just let that go. And I was like, I can actually just have my holy fuck, I could just be excited. I could just dance and bound around the house about how excited I am and go about my day with that excitement. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. I can wash dishes with this excitement and joy, and I'm not presently experiencing the thing that I'm excited about because that's just an idea of something in the future. What I'm experiencing right now is the fullness of this moment, the fullness of this excitement. There's nothing missing here right now.
Yeah, it's such a good point that I love that you guys express, where it's like, welcoming and feeling the full experience isn't just about the quote unquote bad stuff, anger, sadness, grief, whatever it is.
Mm.
It is about pleasure and the good stuff. And I can relate. I have this funny habit that I've noticed over the past year where, like, I'll feel so good and so blissful. I'll just have these, like, it's weird. I feel like someone's like shooting a laser at my heart from a distance that I don't know. And I'll just have this feel really good feeling. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, I should go eat right now.
Uh-huh.
Like I should, it's like, oh, I should go do something that I know won't make me feel good. Like, even though I don't drink, like drink. And it's like, there's a desire to sabotage the pleasure.
Yeah.
And it's really bizarre. And, there's a lot of things that around like, feeling good is bad. Like, there's a lot of imprints in my childhood that are underpinning that I've slowly been discovering. But
Yeah. If I feel pleasure, that must mean that I did something wrong to get here, and there's going to be a shoe that drops later on. And
yeah,
yeah, right.
like pleasure is sinful, like Christian shit that I've accumulated about the wrath of God, like, just all kinds of just just crazy things that curb that ability to just enjoy in the present moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes deeper than that. It's just we live in a world where people are scared. People have been scared for a very long time. We've had very good reasons to be scared. Look back hundreds, thousands of years, it hasn't been an easy time. And so when my expression brings up in someone else a fear, it's natural that my expression in the world will encounter something that might make me, especially as a child, decide that I should just put a lid on it. And there's a very real way that that's true, especially as a small child, especially when you don't know what's going on in the world yet. You haven't built like a deep epistemology, a deep world model for what's going on. You're just taking cues as they are and you're learning that that's the way the world is. So yeah, that may be encoded into some of the ways that people view some of the major religions. And I don't know that that's necessarily core to those, like the 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 birth moments of where those religions sprang from. But I think it's actually just something that is far more inherent in our evolutionary history and our experience, that it's natural for us to develop a sense of something we care about, that is, whether we identify with our body, whether we identify with an ego or an image or a tribe or a nation, and to want to support whatever we identify with in its full expression and unfoldment, and account for mitigating risks and factors. So the fact that I had a moment of competition arise that I pushed away, it's natural. It's natural that, given whatever happened to me in my life, that I would hide that aspect, because of course that could be easily judged. To, on some level, feel like it would be convenient to somebody who I called my friend died and got out of the way. Like, come on, of course that can be a very dangerous thought to say. That can be there's a really beautiful, it's not a poem, it's like a very short essay, I guess, on how the heart, like, don't try to open your heart. It says, it's like the heart breathes. Opening and closing of the heart is how the heart breathes. Open, closed, open, closed. And allowing it to breathe in its own rhythm. Ultimately, I wouldn't say leads to it opening, because that still implies that there's a correct direction to go, but it does expand the range of motion and the capacity. And there are times when a closed heart is maybe going to allow your survival. And that might also lead to later heartbreaks looking back on that moment, and it's all part of it.
It is, man. It is. Well, I think this is a good time to bring this one to a close. And man, I love your perspective, man. I love your stories, and I feel your presence, and it's powerful and beautiful. And so thank you for spending time with us. And this was fun, dude.
Yeah. I love this. Thank you for bringing me on, for asking such great questions and kind of guiding the arc of this conversation. It felt really good.
Absolutely, man. And speaking of conversations, I want to give you an opportunity to tell everyone listening about all the cool stuff that you're up to, including the AOA podcast.
Yeah. So you can find me on the Art of Accomplishment podcast with Joe Hudson, my teacher. And we do courses, online courses, in-person courses. I also facilitate a twice-a-year retreat in the Utah desert called Welcoming Fear. You can go to welcomingfear.com or via the AOA website to get there. What else should I talk about? You can find me on X at Air Kistler, AIRKISTLER. And I'm right now in the middle of the Rite of Passage course. It's this online writing course, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm going to be spitting out some more experimental writings onto my Twitter/X, and you can find me there.
Eric Kistler has been spitting hot fire on X. I can confirm the Rite of Passage stuff it's really cool, man. It's awesome to see that. And I'll make sure to link all those out so that it's easy for everyone listening in the show notes to follow up on those. But thank you, buddy. This was wonderful, and keep all the amazing stuff that they're doing in the world up. It's inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.